So there are, we're home to many things in Excel. So again, status quo, you probably recognize that. That's digital, but it used to be paper. You start at the top left-hand corner. You write, if you're using the sort of Western script tradition, you start at the top left-hand corner, you write on the end of the line, keep going, turn the paper over, and so on. This is from Ted Nelson's Dream Machines. Sorry, typo there, 74 that should be. And this went alongside his well-repeated phrase of intertwingularity. Everything is intertwined. And so, if you think about this as 74, computer monitors weren't common at that time. So a lot of this thinking, as Vince said earlier, actually predates much of this technology. But there he was thinking about just the interconnectedness of things. And this has always stayed with me strongly. Actually, a useful point Brandon was just mentioning about the thing of actually when you write something down, one of the things I undertook while I was doing my studies was to digitize some of Ted's books. Slightly against his nature, because I said the only thing I can do it into is HTML, which caused a bit of a grumble. But there it is, and eventually he'll probably let me, release an ebook for him. It's his work. But certainly, in actually encoding, I did literary machines, and actually basically having to retype most of it because the only things I could get scans were never quite good enough. So you just end up retyping it, and that's a really interesting point you make. I had a real reconnection of the book. It just gave me things I didn't know, I hadn't felt when I was actually reading it just off the page. Now, so hypertext is all about, or was in the time, you can call them nodes, writing spaces, nodes, it's all the same. You have textual objects and connections. Visible links. I can hear that voice echoing out of the void in my ear. But an interesting thing occurred in the early use of hypertext systems. So this is about the second generation of them. This is the end of the 80s systems at the time, things a bit like note cards. And as was alluded to in earlier talks, this was a time when people were thinking very much about formulaic AI, the idea that basically our mind was just a computer, all we had to work out was the right code. We'd worked out that maybe that wasn't so cool. But, so this required you to link this thing to this thing, but you had to specify what it was. And there was a list. Randy Trigg came up with a list of 147 different things, at which point people said, no more link types. Because what they found was the cognitive load of doing this stopped you doing that. This led to spatial hypertext, which is something hidden in the weeds, which I'd sort of like to expose those of you who haven't heard about it. But so what it means is you could have that, but you can also have this, and that is a spatial hypertext. That's one of the easiest ways. Some people talk about it being spatial parsers. That actually is not formally part of what it was about. It was really about the fact that you can have a hypertextual exploration of something or exposition of something that doesn't have to have explicit and overt lines. Now, of course, the cool thing is they're still there. You just turn them on and off again. Here, for what it's worth, is it's a tool I've used in my workspace for 20 years. Tinderbox is StorySpace's younger sister. So it draws from that. And StorySpace is interesting because it has a separate evolution to much of the other hypertext. So StorySpace came out, they started writing, I think, about 1984. It's first publicly demoed at the very first hypertext conference in '87, and already had spatial maps. They were using this. And another point that is in mind when I think about XR, this was the sort of thing I had in mind when people started talking about, well, what would you do in XR? Because we talked about lines getting messy, and also I think there's quite a cognitive load it puts on. If I draw a line between two things on here, that almost immediately implies in a way that there's something more important about those two things. Whereas I can look at that and I say there are some blue things over here, and the blue things are different to these blue things, and there's a hole here. There's some dark knowledge. We don't know what that is. So the ability to do this. So that's taken on a sort of 24-inch screen, but something that I'd call out Brandon for the observation. One of the things about XR is we get to have a limitless screen and be really, really wasteful of pixels in today's sort of thinking. So the screen's as big as you need it to be. The space is as big as you need it to be. And so, in a sense, your challenge and your opportunity is to do something meaningful with it. I think this also shades across slightly to also to memory pads work, which isn't really my space, but it's the same thing. You put things where they need to be. Where you are is what you are. I enjoy, this is me remembering the happy days when I used to read Wire back in the 90s. So, and trigger warning, these are not strict binaries, okay? So if anyone's easing their shoes off the thread, please throw your shoes at the end. But I would draw the point that I think we are seeing this. And again, it doesn't apply to every form of writing, but I certainly know, having used a hypertextual tool for 20 years now, I find it really, really hard to use a word processor because it's all in one stream and I can't find what I want. I hasten to add, for instance, a lot of the work that Fred's done in his author tool is impressive in pushing back against the fixity of the long linear form. But nonetheless, I tend to now write the bits I need to do and assemble them in the way I need them later. Another thing is the tyranny of working in style text. There's a cognitive load to worrying about the fact that spacing's now gone out here, or this thing's in the wrong font, or it's not indented enough. And I find that really hard to turn off. And one of the things I like to do now is I basically put it into HTML, and then I print it into whatever form it's needed. Because CSS these days is good enough to do anything except sort of fine graphical design, such as you might do for book form. And another thing I think, and I find it in all the projects I'm involved in at the moment, is I'm always the person saying, you don't have a technical problem, you've got a social engineering problem. We've got enough technology to do most of the things we want. I mean, there is hard work to do to scale it, and build sustainability and that sort of thing, but we have things that are pretty much good enough to get to a lot of things we want to do. What we don't do is we don't think about our role in it. And a classic point is, we've been talking about metadata today. One of the things that I'm involved in a project that's trying to make sustainability for academic scientific information in the UK. So that's student data. Okay. And the one thing is that if you don't capture your intentionality at the moment, you'll never get it. Why did you make this thing? What do you do it for? You might remember for a couple of years. So if you're doing, say, something like a PhD, you might remember in the time you do it. 2 years later, you won't know. That's gone, lost forever, and no AI is going to get that back for you. For those, I mentioned Spatial updates, don't read all this. I'm going to be up in Dean's lab actually next couple of days, Monday, Tuesday. So if anyone's interested in that, come and ask me about it. But suffice to say, there's lots of really cool stuff. Goes back before the web. So a lot of stuff we're talking about has already been invented, it just hasn't been properly implemented yet. And I'll just leave you with that thought. I mean, I think it came up earlier, but you can either be on the bus or you can be under it.